Excellent. Thank you very much. Great to see so many people join the call this morning. This is round two, part two. How do we want to go with this, Nikki? At the end of the day, it's all about managing a safe return to the workplace. The last session that the team hosted on this particular topic went down really well and was a huge success. There was a lot of questions. As a result of that, it would be super cool if you could put your questions in the chat, please, and we can interrupt Nikki, Claire, and Rebecca as we go. Purely and simply because they've got a lot of content to get through this morning, and this is a really relevant subject, and I know a lot of people have a lot of questions around, how do we manage this going forwards, and what are the legal requirements right now. With that, I shall hand over to yourself, Nikki, if that's okay.
Brilliant. Yes, thank you ever so much, Ollie. Thank you. Clearly forgot to unmute myself there. Morning, everybody. I hope that we're all well, enjoying the wonderful sunshine that seems to have vanished. Thank you very much for the introduction, Ollie. So yes, as Ollie's very kindly said, given that the webinar last month was such a huge topic to try and even just cover a small amount of, given that we had so much interest as well from the chamber members, we decided to run a follow-up session, which is going to be considering the more practical steps the businesses will need to be considering, or perhaps already are considering, starting to return to the workplace. In particular, we are going to be looking at practical steps that businesses have been doing. Because of course, some businesses have continued to work and have continued to have employees in the workplace throughout lockdown. So we're going to have a little look at what some of our clients have been doing. We're going to be looking at what businesses can do if an employee fails to or refuses to attend the workplace, and if they refuse to follow PPE requirements. We are going to look at what a business needs to consider when making redundancies. Claire's going to be kindly picking that one up. What businesses need to consider when introducing a hybrid way of working. Again, that's going to be covered by Becky. And what the benefits of different working methods are in respect of health and safety. We're going to very, very quickly touch on that. So let's first look at what businesses have been doing already. So throughout lockdown and to date, in preparing to return to work. So, as I say, some businesses have actually continued to have staff in the workplace anyway throughout lockdown. Of course, it's depended very much on the individual business. Some of the practical stuff that our clients have been doing are things such as, and I don't know whether any of you guys have been doing any of this, or indeed whether you've got anything that you would like to be adding, but some of our clients have been undertaking surveys, engaging with the staff in a much more active way. Questions have related to how employees have found home working, what challenges they have faced, what challenges they have faced as a team or as an organisation as well. What issues they've had engaging with the business, clients, customers, etc. How businesses can be looking to improve, might be their IT systems, might be their communication systems. Of late, some of our clients have been engaging with their staff through surveys and obviously conversations as well to determine what their workplace is going to look like going forward. So some businesses that were perhaps resistant to blended working approaches in the past have now realised that actually it does work for their organisation, or at least in part. So they're engaging to find out, well, how can we make this work going forward? How many days a week in the office? Because of course teams have different challenges. How many days do you want to be in the office? How many days do you want to be home working? What actually fits in with the business needs as well? Other clients have been offering online workshops, covering a whole host of different issues, so mental health, dealing with stress, dealing with overwhelm, considering burnout. And also some sessions have included things like yoga, meditation. Some of these have been sort of individual, some of these have been as team events, if you like. Some of our clients have introduced rotas or bubbles So, for example, returning into the workplace on a set day, so you are grouped with a bubble of other staff. Again, that can have its challenges in its own rights as to which teams are in on what days, and managing obviously social distancing, etc. One-to-one sessions are becoming more regular, either with HR or with line managers. In some respects, that's a real plus, because actually sometimes line managers don't engage that much with their teams. In my experience, there can be issues there. So regular engagement sessions. Obviously, these engagement sessions tend to be online at the moment, or telephone or WhatsApp. Some businesses are using the chat functions, which is quite interesting actually, because I recall there have been issues in the past with some of my clients with the use of these chat systems through Microsoft Teams, for example. Lots of other chat functions available, but that's actually being encouraged by some of our clients more so. You have to be a bit careful with your IT policies, etc., but that's a separate point. I have one client that likes to actually be on Microsoft Teams all day, so they feel as though they're actually engaging with their team. That I only know one client that actually does that. Buddy systems for well-being. So some businesses have linked up members of staff to be sort of buddies, and if they've got any questions or queries, then you know, they phone or they check in to make sure that their buddy you know, is doing okay, whether from work point of view, whether from mental health point of view, whether from a point of view of just having a chat. You know, bear in mind, some of our colleagues don't live with other people, so for them it's perhaps been a little bit more lonely than for those that have you know, several children running around the house, for example, which I accept will have its own challenges. Virtual social events, they seem to be pretty common occurrences these days. Some are more successful than others. I've heard of cocktail evenings, magicians, lots of quizzes have been happening. So there's a whole host of events, there's a whole host of things that have been taking place to keep people engaged, keep teams feeling as though they are part of a team, keep people talking to one another, and also, obviously, as I say, these don't necessarily have to stop. I think about some businesses have lots of different offices across the UK, and in fact even across the world. So it's collaboration almost of keeping people joined up and brought together. There's also a whole host of things regarding PPE, but I'm going to pass on to Becky, who's going to talk more about the PPE side of things.
Did forget to unmute myself. Thanks, Nikki. So just picking up a little bit slightly on the social bit before we move on to that. So again, businesses have been quite creative in the way. We've got our first online firm team away day. Away day being I'm going to be in my kitchen at home, but we're making pizzas and all sorts. I may report back to you next time on how successful it is, but that's quite a big thing, you know, 100 odd people doing a team meeting remotely, but we're going to explore that because we're not completely back in the office yet. And also clients, not just staff. I know quite a few people who've done client entertaining, so actually tried to take marketing on board to send the cocktail thing, sending out cocktails or wine and having somebody compare a wine tasting thing. So, but I think looking a bit more at perhaps the practical side of things, it is really business specific, to be honest, and circumstance specific. I mean, that's so it's quite hard to give you a real hard line on what to be doing, but a good starting point. And I know a lot of businesses have done this and have probably on their 10th round of risk assessments by now. But and that's what's important. You've got to keep looking at your risk assessment. Does it work for your circumstances, and where are you now? The health and safety executive is very good at coming up with a real, you know, a plethora of examples for that, but it's really thinking about your business and what you might need. So it is an easy example. Lifts, do you have lifts? You're going to have different rules if you've got staircases, if you've got lifts. I know quite a few places have got a rule that now you can perhaps use lifts, but you have to use a mask, or only 2 people are allowed in a lift at any one time. We're quite lucky, we're only on the first floor, so we're not supposed to use our lifts. Where other people, my friend in London, she's 10 floors up, so they've decided we can't safely use our lifts, so we're definitely not coming back. So and encouraging people to use stairs more. So you've got that bit. We've also got things, sort of things we're seeing just in local pubs and things like temperature checks, signage that's around. only one person using the loos at any particular time, and signs on the door to say whether it's engaged or not, which is really quite weird. But anyway, kitchens, rules about, you know, we used to pop off and go and make ourselves a cup of tea. We now in our office, for example, have boiling water to a hot water tap. In a central area, we don't use the kettle anymore. So some of those practical things, but it's really thinking specifically about your business and what do you need to do to make sure people are safe. Some of them are insisting on masks walking around the office, some not. We don't want to be getting to the office as long as we can maintain social distancing. So it is quite business specific, but you will find some really good guides on what certain business sectors might need to think about. Along with that, there's obviously, if you increase flexibility, or perhaps if you haven't brought people back yet, but you're looking to do so, or when you're bringing people back, just basic maths and common sense. If you bring people back in a phased way or a sort of part-time shift type way, you've got less people to manage. So it's easier to keep apart 10 people in an office than it is 20. But you've got to make sure you're safe about how you look at workstations and how you sanitize workstations. Hand sanitizer everywhere is a bit of a must. There will be added costs for businesses. We've got something like just even using the photocopier, for example, realise that the idea was you're going to sanitize it, but actually that doesn't work because it gets into the mechanisms. So actually we're all supposed to try and use these soft tip pens, you know, to try and do that because it's touch screen. So it's really looking around your business, and except you're not going to come up with a perfect solution on day one, and you will make some mistakes because you'll think something's going to work amazingly and then realise actually it doesn't, but it will give you some rules to work with. What's really important with your risk assessment is making sure people understand it, because it's all very well to say we've got this amazing risk assessment and we sent it round to everybody 4 months ago and expect your staff to all know about it, all know and be following it, you know, left, right and centre. We can't keep that sort of information in our heads, and as we said, things may change along the way, so it's really communicating with your staff as and when, you know, if they make mistakes or if they find things aren't working, that having that sort of rapport as people start to come back. So phased return, but also perhaps travel restrictions, appreciating that the extension to the way they may travel may have changed. Maybe they need to travel into the office. Then may be better to, if you have a lot of people coming by public transport, actually if you stagger the work times for a period, then you've got less people coming in at the same time. So that sort of thing. So really looking at your business and changing practices that we always had a practice whereby people signed themselves in. I mean, it's antiquated now when I think about it, but we all signed ourselves in when we came in, fire risks and things like that. Actually, we haven't moved to an automated system, but what we do is just reception does it now. So we're not all swapping pens and things like that. So I was thinking about that sort of thing. The other thing I thought might be quite interesting to touch on basically is people assessing perhaps how some of the emergency practices they put in place, and are they going to look to reassess those? So, for example, some businesses I know put people on reduced pay. Some went on furlough, I'll leave that to one side, but some staff had to take a reduced pay cut because nobody really knew what was happening. It's not necessary, I would say you don't have to make very major decisions now, but it's thinking about, do those emergency practices that operated way back last year, because none of us knew what was happening with our business. Now it's thinking, we've had a full year now plus where we've all been in lockdown, you've been able to reassess how your business goes. If you'd asked your staff to not go on furlough, but perhaps take an 80% pay cut, are you thinking yet about how you may want to change that going forward? I'll go on to a bit with hybrid working, but is it now time to be looking at whether you're paying back furlough? I know a lot of businesses aren't looking at whether they should be paying back furlough or increasing their staff's salary back up again, but perhaps in a cautious way. But so maybe thinking creatively about, actually, do you know what, we can't necessarily put people back up to 100% because we still don't know what we're going to do. But what we might do is, as an acknowledgement, we could perhaps pay a bonus, like COVID bonus or something, or we could give them an extra day's holiday for this year, like a wellbeing mental health thank you day. So trying to think about how, if you had to put some emergency procedures in place that impacted on your staff and, you know, the way they were remunerated, then it's now thinking about whether you are in a position, or your business is in a position, that you might want to be able to pay that back. It will help with things like recruitment and retention. But, you know, that obviously depends on how well businesses have done. I'm pleased to see a lot of businesses have actually done surprisingly better than they thought. They were expecting an Armageddon type situations, but actually they're not. And so I think, actually, do you know what? We didn't need the furlough money. We put everybody on furlough because we were scared. We don't need it now. Actually, we've had quite a bumpy year. We're going to pay that back, or actually we've had our staff on 80% of pay. Actually, we're going to reimburse them for that, because we want to reward them for what they've you know, the sacrifices that they've made for us as a business, and it hasn't been as bad as we thought. So that's a little bit of a whistle stop tour that we use all the time in these things, but hopefully that's given you an idea of perhaps what some clients and businesses are doing out there. Thanks. But any questions, do ask.
So moving on to furloughed employees, I think it's key to not forget about them. So there's been a survey of 500 employees by a business psychology firm that suggests that employees returning from furlough are feeling disconnected and less happy about their roles. The survey found that overall well-being, job satisfaction and personal confidence have all significantly decreased amongst those furloughed workers since the scheme was introduced. It's not also being aware of furloughed employees, but it's a matter of understanding that there is likely to be tensions between those that have been furloughed and not furloughed when you return into the workplace. Those that have been at work, working hard over the last few months may feel a bit of resentment towards those that have been furloughed, whilst those on furlough may feel less second rate and overlooked and frustrated compared to those employees that haven't been furloughed. So how do you integrate furloughed employees back into the workforce? Well, the first thing you need to do is start your preparation early. You may not necessarily know when you'll need your furloughed employees back in the workplace, but have a think or conversations internally about what it may look like and try and prepare where you can. You should keep open lines of communication. So hopefully you will have had conversations with your furloughed employees during this period of time, and you should have a good understanding of their circumstances and how they're feeling. But don't assume just because 2 weeks ago they were fine that they're still okay today, and there may be ongoing concerns and anxiety about returning to work when that actually happens, and the earlier you can address that, the better. You also should start thinking about when people do come back to work, is that going to be at home or is it going to be in the office? For those that it's going to be at home, it may be new to them. So you need to think about what resources that you might need to put in place to help them. And it'd probably be an idea if you can share some of your experiences with them to make that transition a bit more seamless. There will be things that you've learned over the past few months working from home that those on furlough won't have understood. So use this time to explain how it's going to work and how you're going to keep them integrated within the team. For those that are going back into the workplace, obviously you need to cover the recent health and safety guidance, but you should need to communicate that with those that are on furlough so they understand what the workplace is going to look like and what changes you're implementing, and give them the opportunity to give their feedback and express their anxieties and concerns so it can all be addressed. Finally, have a think about how the first day or the first week's going to work so that it can work as seamlessly as possible. For example, think about arranging a one-to-one meeting between the employee and their line manager first thing when they arrive to discuss any business changes or what's been going on or what's expected of them. Allow them to catch up on any internal communications and their emails, and also a chance to catch up with colleagues that they may not have seen for many months. If employees have been doing training or webinars, use it as an opportunity to let them share what they've learned over the last few months. It'd be a good way to help them feel engaged. And finally, the biggest top tip is make sure that employees know when somebody is coming back from furlough to work so that everybody is in the loop. So we're now going to pass over to Nikki to have a look at what happens if you fail to follow rules.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much, Claire, excellent. Yeah, that's actually really interesting, just picking up on what you just said, Claire. That's such a good point. Letting people know when people have come back from furlough. I know myself, I've been surprised on the other occasion when I have been in the workplace and someone's back off furlough. It's like, oh, hello, how are you? Haven't seen you for a long time, didn't know that you were back. It's not really the best way, is it really? So yes, moving on to considering what do we do? What do we do if somebody refuses to return to the workplace? I don't know if anyone's experienced any of these issues yet. I know some of my clients have. And what do you do if an employee refuses to comply with any of the PPE measures that obviously now will have been put in place? So let's first of all just talk about refusing to return to the workplace. I'm only going to very, very quickly run through this with you. I will just say it's really very, very important, as is always the case with employment law, that each case is considered individually. So when somebody refuses to return to the workplace, and as I say, I've had a few that have arisen now, it's important, I think, firstly to consider what's the public health guidance. And it is repeatedly changing, and goodness me, hasn't it, over the last 12 months. But what is the public health guidance? What is it that the government is saying about working, being in the workplace or working from home? What are the local restrictions? What are the national restrictions? Now, seem to be in a position whereby things, touch wood, are settling down, but that's not to say that come summer holidays, people travelling around, maybe travelling abroad, who knows what's going to happen. I don't know that it's not altogether unreasonable that we could end up with local restrictions, national restrictions again, who knows? So just be mindful of what the guidance is at that point in time when you're experiencing issues with people returning. Try to understand what the reason is for their refusal. This is actually really quite important. Is it that somebody is refusing to attend simply because they don't want to? Again, I had a client this week whereby the employee doesn't want to return because they've got a puppy. They've got a puppy. That's going to be probably a pretty regular occurrence now. It's not really a good enough reason. Do they have concerns about health and safety? Are they concerned about the health and safety in the workplace? Are they concerned that you as the employer are not doing something that you ought to be doing? Let's engage with the employee. Let's understand what the concerns are. Let's look at addressing their concerns. Perhaps they might be suggesting something that you haven't thought of that is actually perfectly reasonable, maybe a good idea, and is very easy to implement. Is there a medical reason as to why they don't want to return to work? Is it medical reason for themselves? Do they care for somebody? Do they have a child that's got a medical condition? Is that person pregnant? Is that person clinically vulnerable? You should probably have some of this information, I would have thought, by now, given the last 12 months, but nonetheless, is there another reason altogether as to why they don't want to return? For example, because they have a puppy? Consider whether there's any ways of working with that individual. Now, this is not always going to be the case, but actually it depends who the employee is and what the issues are. It might be somebody that you really want to keep on board, you really want to engage with, you very, very valued. So just think outside the box. So I don't know, depending on what the issues are as to why they don't want to be returning, is there any way of, I don't know, changing the working hours so they can travel off peak? Can there be a degree of flexibility? Can there be a degree of home working? Maybe not all of the time, but part of the time. Can they be taking any holiday or unpaid leave? Depending on what the issues are as to why they don't want to be returning. If they are simply refusing to return to work because they don't want to, so not because they have an underlying medical condition, not because they're concerned about any health and safety in the workplace, not because they're pregnant, for example, but they just don't want to because, let's use the puppy as an example again, I've got a puppy. Well, in those sorts of instances, I think as long as you have actually engaged with the staff, don't obviously just jump ahead to making decisions or what you think is the case, because what might have been 12 months ago, they may now have an underlying medical condition. If they're simply refusing to and they have no good reason for that, then potentially it may be fair to be disciplining the individual. It may be reasonable to be dismissing them. There's an argument that it would be a misconduct issue. They're failing to follow a reasonable management instruction. If they're not attending the workplace when they should be, then arguably they are AWOL, absent without leave, which again is a disciplinary offence in normal circumstances. But you do need to be careful because, as I say, if there's a genuine reason and potentially discriminatory reason as to why they won't attend, then you do need to be a little bit careful. But if you've explored everything and actually there is no real genuine reason, then, as I say, it may be possible to discipline. Don't forget, you need to go through the usual disciplinary procedure. Certainly if somebody's got over 2 years length of service, or if there's contractual right to follow a certain process, then of course you need to follow the usual process. Now, as I say, you do need to be very careful. You need to consider every employee on a case-by-case basis, dare I say that. Employees are afforded protection under the Employment Rights Act if they hold a reasonable belief that attending work could put them in serious and imminent danger. So they are afforded protection from dismissal for raising health and safety concerns. They are afforded protection for being subjected to a detriment for raising health and safety concerns. A detriment could be something like not being given a promotion either now or at some point in the future, if they're not given the promotion because they've raised health and safety concerns here and now. Not being offered additional hours, maybe if they're on a 0 hours contract. I can hear you say, but they're not willing to return to the workplace. And obviously, if they're not paid because they've raised a genuine health and safety concern, then it could be an argument that non-payment is a detriment as well. It is very much on a case-by-case basis, because of course, if somebody is AWOL and it's perfectly reasonable to be requiring them into the workplace, then actually they wouldn't technically be paid because they are AWOL. But if they are not attending or refusing to attend the workplace because of a health and safety concern, then that's slightly different. Don't forget that, of course, raising health and safety issues does give grounds for, so if somebody is under 2 years length of service, they've raised a health and safety concern and they're dismissed, then they would have an automatically unfair dismissal claim, more commonly known as whistleblowing, perhaps. So do just be a little bit mindful of that. Though whistleblowing, protected detriments, it's a very complicated area of law, which I really do not have time to go into now. But it is a very complex area, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be a health and safety issue. It's just that the employee believed that there was serious and imminent danger for themselves, or indeed for another employee. Very, very quickly, I just want to touch on a recent case that has gone through the tribunals. It relates to an individual that was dismissed last year, so after the first lockdown. Very, very briefly, it's a case of Rogers and Lee's Laser Cutting Limited. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It's a tribunal decision, so it is not binding, but nonetheless, I thought it was quite interesting that we're now starting to get cases coming through the system. This involved an employee with less than a year's length of service. I think he had less than 6 months, but anyway, very short length of service. The employer actually remained open during the first national lockdown. They implemented social distancing measures, hand washing, etc. The employee texted to say that he felt that he had no alternative but to stay off work until the lockdown had eased. Well, at that point in time, we didn't know how long all of this was going to be going on for, did we? His child, or one of his children, suffered sickle cell anemia, and he also had a very young baby, I think about 6 or 7 months old, and he was worried about infecting them by continuing to come into the workplace. He was dismissed. The tribunal considered the government guidance that at that time, of course, first national lockdown, was to hand wash and social distance, both of which were in place in the workplace. They considered the fact that the employee hadn't raised any issues about the workplace or any concerns about danger in the workplace. He didn't take any steps to try and rectify or sort anything out. He simply refused to come into the workplace until this had all blown over. So actually, in that case, it was decided that the decision to dismiss him was actually fair. As I say, it is on a case-by-case basis, though. You do also need to be mindful of potential claims. As I say, there's automatic unfair dismissal, ordinary unfair dismissal, discrimination, grounds disability, sex. As I said, there's whistleblowing detriment claims as well. Some of these claims are uncapped, so just be a little bit mindful of that as well.
Nikki, there's a couple of quick questions. Sorry if I could just touch on they're quite relevant. If somebody's been doing their job successfully for the last 14 months and they're asked to return to the workplace on the grounds of just being present in the workplace, is that feels a little bit grey, because the employee can argue the fact that they've been able to perform their function unless the business disagrees through things like the team isn't as efficient remotely, as an example. Is there any conversations around that? What would be the sort of advice in that scenario?
Yeah, I think that's something that Becky might be talking about a little bit later, I think. So yeah, there's an argument, isn't there, by a lot of people? Well, we've been doing this for over 12 months now. It's fine, it works from home, blah, 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 so therefore I want to continue home working 100% of the time. It does also depend what your contract says. If your contract has states, which often contracts will state the offices as the place of work, then that is actually what the contract says. There is a bit of a split argument as to whether there could be a custom and practice argument to say, well, it's been happening for this long, so therefore there's that argument that could be run. I think there's also an argument, though, by the employers, quite frankly, that your contractual terms are that you work in the workplace. Last 12 months has been exceptional, and actually that doesn't amount to a change of your contract, your contractual terms and conditions in respect to place of work. It'll be interesting to see how this pans out through the course of claims going forward. I do think there is an argument on both behalves, depending which side of the fence you want to be arguing at. I think there are also lots of other arguments. Yes, okay, fundamentally your job may be able to be, I think it depends on the individual case. I think it depends on the individual. If it is an employee that, let's be honest, you'll have really high valued employees and you'll have some that are less valued, unfortunately. If it's somebody that's particularly valued, you as a business may very well want to, in a fair manner, go above and beyond to keep them happy, to keep them sweet, to keep them in the business, because otherwise they may end up moving on. Somebody else you may be less inclined to, but there's all sorts of arguments anyway about engagement, business development, not just a mental health point of view in terms of speaking to colleagues, but actually there is something about being in the office and being amongst your team, particularly in certain roles, for example, sales roles, creative roles. So I think a lot of it depends on the organisation, what the contract says, well, actually it's the starting point, the contract, the organisation, what you're trying to achieve. Yeah,
for sure. I think I know, again, from a previous life, people had registered offices, but worked from home predominantly. And so changes of that typically went through consultation. That's what happened in that scenario. With regards to, so the other piece to this as well is, transportation and the commute into the office. Not everybody goes in their own car and effectively travels in their own bubble. I can appreciate in certain scenarios as well, people that have suffered from COVID that have recovered, there may be a degree of anxiety around having to use public transport again to commute to offices and workplaces. Is there any considerations that the employer needs to have in that scenario where their employees are putting themselves at risk essentially?
What, by travelling in?
Well, yeah, again, through public transport and things. I'm not, if you're in London and you're going on the tube as an example.
Yeah. And again, that's where you're looking at the individual circumstances. From a legal point of view, is there actually going to be any discrimination arguments against you as the employer for not agreeing that they can continue home working or paying for the taxi to get into the workplace or whatever it is? And actually, unless if you have an underlying medical condition, i.e. a disability discrimination argument, and even that would be fact dependent as well, to be honest with you, then I think it's very much a case of engaging and understanding their concerns. I don't think it is reasonable, full stop, for people not to, everybody that needs to take public transport doesn't have to come into the office, and everybody that can drive themselves does. that doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, you need to be looking at the business needs and weighing up the business needs against individual concerns, trying to find ways around it, which is why I say if public transport's an issue, and I understand if you're in London, you don't want to be cramming onto, I don't know if you do cram on anymore, I've not been down there for over a year, but you know, can you not look at off-peak? You know, travelling off peak, so you actually start at 10 o'clock, you finish at 6 or whatever it is, or coming in earlier in the morning. And can you not have a bit of a blend between having to come into the office and also home working? I'm just having, I've not read everybody's comments because obviously I've been chatting away, but I note that Kate Kate Salmons has said that you need people back in the team, back in the office as the team is suffering and is not as efficient. And yeah, that's absolutely one argument that can be had. I know from, I'll be honest, from a Buckles point of view, part of the rationale for wanting us back, and I don't think we're going back full time, I think it's going to be a blended approach, is from business development. It's a colleagues collaborating, talking to one another. When I do go in, it is nice to have a chat and catch up with what's going on with people personally, but also in their teams, also with their clients. You know, is there any opportunity from an employment law perspective when I'm speaking to somebody in the social housing team or somebody in our corporate team? You're absolutely right, and I think that's where there's business needs, is there not? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all, right?
It's, and you're absolutely right, Ollie. That is it, and it's not one size fits all for all organisations either, which is why it's really rather difficult to give a generic, broad brush approach. Because I appreciate everybody here will have different. You're in different industries, you have different teams, you have different sizes, you have different expectations, you have different desires. Some want everybody back 100% of the time. I question why, because you also need to think about, which the next session is going to be talking about retention and recruitment, but you also need to be thinking about the here and now. You need to be thinking about 5-10 years time. You need to be thinking about the next generation and what they want as well. So I don't know if that helps. Shall
Yeah.
very quickly, because I'm conscious of time, just broad brush PPE measures. Hopefully you're not going to have issues with people refusing to hand wash, wear face masks if they need to in certain areas, social distance. Hopefully not. But just very quickly, if you do have any issues with employees, and obviously, as I said on the last session, there's health and safety requirements so that you have statutory duty to ensure the health, safety and welfare of staff. You have common law duty to take reasonable care of their safety, and there's implied duty for employees to follow lawful and reasonable orders. So things like social distancing, temperature checking, etc., they are maybe not temperature checking, but they're all lawful or government guidance. It's what businesses now need to be doing, and that's therefore what staff need to be doing. Now, again, if somebody refuses to, well, what is the rationale for that? Again, do you have a medical reason? I can't wear a face mask because I suffer very bad asthma. Therefore, you would potentially be exempt. Are there any other reasons for it? I can't really think of any. There could be any religious reasons. Can't really think of any. But there's always something that comes up and surprises me. So again, try to understand the rationale behind that. It may be possible to be disciplining people if they're not following the measures in place. Again, just need to understand the reason and rationale as to why they aren't. I just wanted to be very quick. There's another tribunal case, which some of you may very well have heard of. It's, if I'm saying this correctly, Cubelius and Kent Foods Limited. And it was reported a little while ago. It's regarding a driver that refused to wear a face mask. That's not completely fair of me to say. He refused to wear a face mask in his cab. So he was a driver, he went onto a customer site. He went onto this customer site very frequently because this particular customer was a huge customer. I think it's about 90 or 95% of the business. And employee handbook required the employees to take all steps to safeguard their own health and safety and that of others. Seems quite reasonable. Driver handbook required them to follow customer instructions regarding PPE. And customer required everyone to wear face masks at all times on site. Now, this employee was in his own cab and he didn't feel that he had to wear the face mask whilst in his cab because it was his area. he was asked to several times by the customer. He refused to, so the customer banned him from site. He had over 2 years thanks to service, but the employer dismissed him. And they dismissed him because, as I say, I think 95% of the work was for this particular customer. Now, he brought a claim for unfair dismissal. And in essence, the tribunal, and again, it was a tribunal which is not binding on the other courts or jurisdictions, found that the decision to dismiss was fair. They applied the conduct or misconduct rule, so i.e. they carried out fair and reasonable investigation, genuine belief that he was guilty of the misconduct, they had acted reasonably in dismissing him, and the decision fell within the band of reasonable responses. Now, we'll just say that obviously these cases are not binding and they are fact sensitive. But again, it's just another interesting one because we don't have that many cases that have actually come through the courts yet in respect of COVID related issues. And obviously this is one of them. So it just goes to show that action can be taken and it can be fair, but obviously it does depend on the individual cases. Now, I appreciate that that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of everything. Any questions, queries, shout up, drop me an email afterwards. Happy to have a chat. But I am going to pass over to Claire now, who's going to talk about redundancies.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, moving away from PPE, we're just going to look at, I suppose, the broader picture of what your business is going to look like following return to work. So as we're coming out of lockdown and the restrictions are easing, it's going to be a time to evaluate the workforce and work out whether it can continue as it is, whether you need to restructure, or whether redundancies are needed. Now, it is important to remember that despite the restrictions that COVID's had on our lives, this does not mean that any part of a fair redundancy procedure can now be ignored. This particularly applies to consultation. It is key now, probably more than ever, that you have consultation meetings with your employees prior to any redundancy situation. I know it may be more difficult as face-to-face may not always be possible, although should be easier now with restrictions lifting, but you can have such discussions over video calls. The financial risk of getting things wrong can be significant. So what do I mean by following a fair procedure? Well, firstly, you do need to establish that there is a genuine redundancy situation. So that's whether there's a closure of the business completely, or closure of one office, or whether there is just a reduced need for a number of employees in a particular team or area. So once you've established where there is a need to make some reductions, you should identify the appropriate pool from which to select potentially redundant employees. So you need to look at what work has reduced and identify those that work within that group. You then need to put together an objective selection criteria to score those in the pool. It's best that at least 2 managers score the individual separately to ensure that the marks are objective. And then you need to consult those that have been provisionally selected for redundancy. In order for consultation to be done properly, it needs to be meaningful, which means that the employer has to be open to any points that the employee raises and to take them on board before a final decision is being made. So as part of the consultation process, you will discuss with the individuals that have been provisionally selected for redundancy their scores, and allow them the opportunity to challenge those scores and take on board their comments, and if required, change their scoring. You should also allow them to consider alternatives to redundancies, and you need to have, again, a meaningful consideration as to whether what they have proposed would work in the future. So as long as those 3 key elements, so a selection pool, a selection criteria, and you've fully consulted, then you are following a fair and reasonable procedure. But there are a few points to note. You must include employees that are absent, either on long-term sick leave, maternity, or other family leave. They need to be kept informed of the position. They need to receive the same information that those employees who are still in the workplace receive. They shouldn't be ignored. Secondly, you need to remember that employees on either maternity leave, adoption leave, or shared parental leave have an automatic right to be offered suitable alternative work where it is available. If you're making 20 or more employees redundant within a 90-day period, you will need to enter into collective consultation. Another point to note is that employees who have been given notice of redundancy are entitled to take off paid time to seek alternative employment or to arrange training. Also be aware that in terms of notice, you have the option to require employees to work their notice or to be paid in lieu. Please remember that if employees are on furlough, their notice pay needs to be based on their pre-furlough pay. You can't claim furlough pay under the scheme for notice periods. And statutory redundancy pay is also based on pre-furlough pay. And finally, employees on furlough can be made redundant. You don't need to wait to the end of the furlough scheme. However, you do need to remember that employees that do the same job, whether furloughed or not, must be included in the pool. Employees on furlough cannot automatically be selected for redundancy. You must follow a fair procedure first. But is redundancy the only option? Making employees redundant is an obvious option for reducing costs. However, making redundancies is a real loss for a business. Not only is it expensive, but you may have invested in those employees and they will be difficult to replace. In addition, is there a possibility that in the medium to long term, there is going to be an upturn in the business? So maybe retaining those employees would be more of a practical approach. So before making redundancies, consider whether or not there's any other options to reduce overheads rather than just add headcount. Consider pay freezes. I know it won't be popular for many reasons, but your main commitment as an employer should be to preserve employment for as many people as possible. Stopping a pay rise might actually be a good way to manage costs and preserve employment for the majority. Or finally, think about coming to an agreement with employees to reduce their salary or hours. This has the same approach as redundancies, i.e. it reduces costs, but it doesn't require employees to go. An additional benefit is that when the business actually picks up, you will have the employees there. And actually right now, it may be that employees are looking to change the hours that they work. COVID may have made them realise that they want more of a work-life balance, or that they are willing to work 9 days in a 2-week period, for example. So it might be worth, before going down a formal redundancy process, to see if anyone is willing to change their terms and conditions. But please note, you can't just change the terms and conditions. You do need their consent. Otherwise, you could have a very costly tribunal claim. But Becky is going to go into a bit more detail about changing contracts and terms and conditions. So I'll hand over to Becky.
Lovely, thanks, Claire. We had a question, just to cover off first, we had a question about lateral flow tests and stuff, which I've tried to answer in the chat thing. But if you need any more, do feel free to come back to me. I'm going to cover this as quickly as I can because of time, but I'm looking at my phone because it was on the BBC website. It was announced this morning about no full-time return to the office, over 1 million people. Almost 50 of the biggest employers are now saying they're going to be embracing blended learning. Blended working, I suppose we learn while we're at work anyway. I'm going to try and take it from the two angles. One, if it's from the employer, it's sort of driven by the employer, and one if it's driven by the employee. So if the employer decides that we would now like people to work in a more hybrid way, so from home, from work, 100% from one, 100% from the other, something in the middle, then that is a business decision that employers need to consider. What we're saying is it's also worth thinking, well, not one size fits all. So while a lot of businesses are going to look to embrace flexible working, but to think about you individuals as well. So now I'm a middle-aged woman with 2 kids. Working from home is fantastic. I've got a big house. When I was in London 15 years ago, living in a 1-bedroom flat, I wouldn't really want to be working from home exclusively. So on the one hand, we all think that people might embrace this, but that's not necessarily the case. So employer decides they want to introduce a more flexible working pattern. First and predominantly speak to your employees about it, or speak to individuals about it. Decide do you want a one size fits all? Probably going to be harder to get across the line, or are you open to a more flexible, do you know what, we will take anything from one thing to another? So try initially to discuss it, because location and hours, so I'm just going to cover those two really. So the location where somebody works and perhaps the hours they want to work, if you want to introduce a more flexible working pattern, are 99% going to be a term of the employment contract. So changing it is going to be a permanent change to the employee's terms and conditions of employment, which an employer cannot impose unilaterally. It needs to be agreed between the two parties. And so if you would come up with an agreement, that is a variation to the terms and conditions, great, absolutely amazing. What if the employee resists and doesn't want to change their hours in the way you want to? And that is where it becomes trickier. And it's good to think about how you will deal with that before you start the process, because once you're in that process, you don't want to have to backtrack. So if you can agree things informally, great. And in a way, the wider spread that you employ, the easier you're going to get to agree to something. So if you say, we will allow people to, and my husband's friend, for example, brought in a flexible working policy now where anybody can work predominantly from home, predominantly from work, or 50-50, and you just discuss it with your manager. That is about as flexible as it can be. I can't see many people who wouldn't agree to it because it fits all their requirements. But if you decide we want everybody to work from home for 50% of their time, some people might not want that. So thinking about what you're going to do if you get resistance, if somebody doesn't change the terms and conditions, but you're adamant that that's what you want to do for business because you've decided you need to close, you want an operation there, but you can't afford the site presence there, so you want everybody to be able to work from home. There are tactical reasons of doing it that minimise your risk. You can force through changes, but it is always going to be risky, particularly with employees with more than 2 years service, because changing terms and conditions of somebody you're not refusing is not necessarily going to be a fair reason for dismissal. So there are ways of forcing it through if you absolutely have to, where you can minimise your risk along the way, but your best thing is to try and get agreement, and the way you're going to get agreement is by more flexibility. Flicking through to, what about if an employee, so any employee with over 26 weeks continuous service for that employer has a legal right to request a flexible working request, and the employer has a duty to reasonably consider that flexible working request. There's a set statutory process to follow. You're also likely to have your own policy, your own flexible working procedure. Most of the ones I see follow the statute, follow the set rules, but you need to make sure you follow that process. Your only duty is to reasonably consider it, and you can only reject it for one of a number of set reasons. I want to say 9 off the top of my head, but apologies if I'm wrong on that. But off the record, you can get most reasons in those 9 reasons. They're very wide, they can be interpreted. As long as you're reasonably considering it and you refuse it, you've satisfied your criteria under your right to request flexible working. But what I would say is there's other things that you need to go, and actually, to be honest, the risk for not following a process, you're not looking at massive high value claims, and that of itself. However, you are also looking at territory potentially if the person decides to leave because they think you haven't reasonably considered their request, you haven't treated them fairly. You could be looking, and they decide, right, that's it, the relationship then ends. You could be looking at potential constructive unfair dismissal arguments if somebody's got more service. You could also be looking at potential discrimination arguments where if there are disability reasons, perhaps where somebody wants to work in a particularly flexible way, or childcare requirements, you could look at sex discrimination type arguments still. So legally, you could have some legal risks if you just can't blank, even if you've got a fair reason for why you've dismissed it, for the way that you've approached it. And so you do always have risks. Also, the other thing I would suggest that you need to think quite carefully is there are some real benefits of flexible working, hybrid working. It maintains it's good for efficiency, staff morale, it helps with retention, communication. So there are commercial risks as well. And sometimes I think the commercial risks are potentially higher than the legal risks, although the legal risk can be very real. So the more flexible workforce you've got, and the more engaged workforce you've got, and productivity and stuff like that, actually is going to give you some real benefits for recruitment and retention. So while you've got legal implications for not changing term, for not being as flexible as you can for a business, there is also you've also got practical limitations. that's predominantly geared towards an environment where arguably you can still work from home. You will also have environments with people working on, shops who just cannot work from home. But the chances are, if they can't work from home, they've been either working from home, in the office, or sorry, in work or on furlough until now. So my answer is probably a bit more geared towards situations where they could work from home, but you don't want them to, or they don't want to. The other thing I always say to clients, and this is to do with changes in hours as well, particularly, as well as changes in hours. If people might want to reduce their hours, they may have done reduced hours, quite like it, or want to use this as a way of being flexible. It's the job, often, but they have to do it. It's a full-time role. So I'm going to use a receptionist for an example. We need a full-time receptionist. So no, I won't let my receptionist change her hours, his hours. You need a full-time role. You don't need that person to do the job on a full-time basis. So it's how you may be able to adapt. So it's the role and the requirements of the role, not necessarily the person. So I appreciate that that was quite quick, and any questions people have got, do feel free to ask, but I was conscious of that time. Finally, just quickly, making sure that you record any changes to terms and conditions. So it is a permanent variation. If you want to try and make it flexible to see how it works, make sure that you record that properly, but do be mindful of customer practice. So you can't constantly say, oh, this is only flexible, this is only flexible. We might change it, it's temporary. Hold on a minute, the person's been doing it for 2 years now. It's going to be hard for you to argue it's not a permanent change to terms and conditions. But if you want to try it for a little bit, first of all, you need to be saying that and monitoring that situation. And flexible working policies as well. People may want to elaborate them a little bit more, given that we've all of us have operated in quite a hybrid way over the last year or so. This sort of leads quite nicely onto our next session by some of our other colleagues who have been in the HR sector, who are going to be dealing with recruitment and retention, because actually we think this hybrid working is going to be quite a big arsenal on that. I've known quite a lot of people now. I've got a friend who's recently got a new job, lives in Peterborough, but is working for a firm in Leeds. And there's no reason why he can't, because he's going to be working full time from home. So it opens up your recruitment pool massively as well. You could be working in London, and instead of having to work in London with extraordinary house prices, could be working somewhere else from home most of the time. So it does feed in quite heavily to recruitment and retention, and that's going to be the next session run by the recruitment chamber. So that's me done. Any questions, like I said, do ask, because I'm conscious I've got 2 minutes left. So thanks very much for your time, and I'll pass back to Nikki.
Thanks ever so much, Becky. Thank you. Yeah, so just very, very quickly, just picking up on obviously a lot of what Becky's been saying. Benefits of different working methods. Well, depends which side of the fence, again, that you're sitting on, but benefits from an employer's point of view is, as Becky has said, potentially it opens up a pool of talent much further than just a regional geographic area, potentially. I know from my clients, I've actually had an opportunity to recruit talent which they would not normally be able to recruit. That's due to the marketplace as well, but it's geographical too. You have staff that are more willing to be loyal and committed and stay with you. I talk about the future generations. They do want different work patterns, work-life balances, etc., to what is more traditional. So there are a whole host of benefits to organisations, and it's really important, as Ollie's already said, one size does not fit all. Some people have childcare, some people have caring commitments, some people just want to have a life, some people want to do fitness or attend fitness classes. There's all sorts of different things that people want. And it's all about, as a business, what fits for you, but also if you go the extra mile, you may find that staff engage and stick around for a bit longer. Now, just again picking up, Becky said, so our next HR forum bite-sized session is on the 3rd of June, I believe. That's looking at recruitment and retention, which is a lot of businesses are recruiting, and again, talking about retention, that feeds back into some of what we've been saying today. Chamber also have some other events that are going on as well. So there is a really rather interesting event I've just been having a look at online, building resilience through humour. Got to say, that sounds really interesting. That's on the 12th of May at 10:30 till 11:30. Speaker sounds really very interesting as well. Dr. Vanessa Marseille, I think, an expert on human leadership. So I think if you're around, that sounds a pretty good event to be attending. And we do have the Chamber are running another one. Excuse me, my voice is going today. Championing a business, preparing for the next normal. And that is on the 13th of, apologies, got a call coming in. One of the downsides of technology, hey? That's on the 13th of May, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. So again, have a look on LinkedIn, on the LinkedIn site for the Chamber of Commerce. Have a look on their website as well under the events section, and see what's occurring. I would just like to thank everybody for attending. I know some people have already slipped off. That's because we are overrunning ever so slightly. But could I just take the opportunity to thank everybody for attending? Hopefully you found it interesting. Thank you very much to Ollie for hosting, as always. Thank you to Claire and Becky for their contribution. Thank you to the rest of the HR sector committee as well, because there are a number of us on the committee, and there is a lot of background work that goes into these, and just because you're not speaking doesn't mean that there hasn't been participation. And thank you, of course, to Vic from the Chamber for allowing us to have a speaking slots and put everyone to sleep on a Thursday morning. I don't know if Vic wants to say anything to round up.
No, other than to simply thank you guys for putting this on, and for the participants for joining, and also for highlighting for me the other events that are taking place are available on our website. But the bottom line is, if there weren't people willing to join and listen to you on a Thursday morning, we wouldn't be making progress. This is such a challenging area, and I think you guys have covered it excellently, as the chat has proven with the number of questions we had. So thanks to you all as well as our presenters.
Thank you. I was just quickly going to say, in terms of some feedback, Ollie, have you had a chance to have a look at a poll for us? We just wanted to know.
Yeah, we can launch that very quickly, although people are leaving. So
future sessions, just to help us in case there's anything burning that you'd like us to cover. Because we're conscious, yeah, there is a lot to cover in employment law. So if you could help us out as to what you'd like us to cover next, that would be great.
And indeed, if there's any topics that we haven't included in this poll, please just ping the Chamber or one of us an email, and we will certainly look at putting sessions on. It's quite difficult because businesses are at different stages, so everyone's got different issues, different concerns, different challenges. So please let us know, and we will focus our sessions towards what you want. Thank you all again.
That's awesome. Nikki, do you want to just grab a screenshot of the poll there?
Sorry, me?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just real quick.
Can't see the results yet.
Sorry, I'm just going to share these now. Sorry, it's just so that you've got that moving forwards. There we go. So that's fairly overwhelming, right?
63%. What's next on performance? 25. Oh no, difficult conversation. I do enjoy that topic.
Well, got it.
Yeah,
I've got a screenshot. I can share it in a minute.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Like always, the video will be circulated. Have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you.